The Nine: Inside the Secret World of the Supreme Court by Jeffrey Toobin. This book gives a very valuable peek into the inner working of court. Toobin points out the increasing polarization of the court in recent years, reflecting deep ideological division within American society and politics. The main message of the book is that Supreme Court is just another political branch, differing from Congress and executives. Political means, in Toobin's view, the justices decide cases in accordance with their partisan views. This book put the importance of the work the justices do in Supreme Court. This book is a multiple biography of the 9 Supreme Court justices in the period from the 1990s until 2008. It covers both Clinton and Bush appointees. For more than 200 years, the Supreme Court has confronted the same political issues as the other branches of government, with a similar record of success and failure. Regarding Sandra O'Connor, Toby wrote, "And there was something else that drew O'Connor's wrath, if not her tears: the presidency of George W. Bush, whom she found arrogant, lawless, incompetent, and extreme. O'Connor herself had been a Republican politician, the only former elected official on the court, and she had watched in horror as Bush led her party and the nation in directions that she abhorred. Sandra O'Connor had an uncanny ear for American public opinion, and she kept her rulings closely to what most people wanted, or at least would accept. Earl Warren, who served as Chief Justice of the United States from 1953 to 1969, has a powerful and lasting influence over American law. Just weeks after joining the court, Thomas had a chance to strike back at them who had tormented him in the hearings. The question before him: should Roe versus Wade be overruled? In truth, it seemed Sandra O'Connor never gave abortion rights a great deal of attention as a legislature. To the extent she thought about abortion, she tried to steer a middle course between extremes on the issue, an approach that would remain her touchstone in the higher stakes setting of the Supreme Court. Outsiders tend to be surprised by how rarely Supreme Court justices speak to each other one by one. Under Rehnquist, the 9 spent a good deal of time together as a group. Argument days, most Mondays and Wednesdays, when they were in session, were preceded by the traditional 36 handshakes, each justice with each other, and they had lunch together most of these days as well. Bill Clinton thought it was unhealthy that the court was dominated by former judges. Ginsburg talked about the early loss of her mother, followed by the near loss of her husband. What Clinton saw was that beneath Ginsburg's reserved exterior was a heroic American woman. To be sure, this was a woman with a big heart. The Ginsburg nomination turned out to be an apt metaphor for the Clinton presidency as a whole. The process that led to her selection was a chaotic, but the result was admirable: the selection of a universally respected justice who reflected with great precision the moderate to liberal politics of the president who chose her. Indeed, more than any other recent president since Johnson, Clinton was able to use his appointments to shape the court in line with his own views. Breyer was the sunniest individual to serve on the Supreme Court in a great many years. Optimism was the core of his character. Like other justices, Breyer knew the famous question that William Branson used to ask his law clerks: "What is the most important law as the Supreme Court?" The clerk would puzzle for some time. Freedom of speech? Equal protection? Separation of powers? Until the justice would raise his tiny hand and say, "5. The law of 5." With 5 votes, you can do anything around here. When the power, prestige, and financial support of government is placed behind a particular religious belief, the indirect pressure upon religious minorities to conform to the prevailing officially approved religion is plain. He wrote. A year later, the justices banned mandatory Bible reading in public schools as well. Thomas rarely spoke in oral arguments. He was the only justice who suffered through a brutal confirmation fight. He was the only African American. He was more than a decade younger than most of his colleagues. He denounced self-pity. There was no one on the court remotely like Thomas, philosophically or personally. Thomas was the most conservative justice. To say that Thomas opposed affirmative action is not to say that he fought all efforts to help poor people, especially blacks. He thought the traditional civil rights movement bred a culture of victimization in blacks and paternalism in whites. As Thomas himself would acknowledge privately, he benefited from affirmative action at every step of his life, in gaining admission to Holy Cross and Yale, in being hired for civil rights job in the Reagan administration, and in winning appointment to the court. But he thought that ultimately these kinds of efforts to help people were self-defeating. Thomas went on to describe how his despair grew when he was a law student, filling him with anger, resentment, and rage. In time, he came to the revelation that the individual approach, not the group approach, is the better, more acceptable, more supportive, and less dangerous one. Thomas received a 1.5 million book advance from the publishing company owned by Rupert Murdoch, the media giant, who has been a supporter of conservative causes. But there was another reason the court moved left in the late 90s, and it had to do with the changing role of Chief Justice Rehnquist.